Hi, this is Zach with Worn & Wound, and today I'll be taking a look at the new watches by Baltic. So Baltic is a brand that actually has not officially kind of hit the market yet, but they've been making kind of a splash on Instagram and Facebook, gotten a lot of attention, and we just had the pleasure of meeting the founder of the brand, Etienne Malik, who came to New York City from Paris to bring his watches to show people. He left us a couple to kind of take a look at. And what he's trying to do with the brand, or rather what the brand's trying to do, is kind of recreate the feeling of, kind of a vintage watch, or rather watches from the 40s, mostly 40s, maybe a little bit 50s, taking some of their styling cues, but then, making kind of a nice substantial modern watch, but also keeping it very affordable. And the reason these kind of gotten a bunch of attention is they look really, really good. So, there's just a really nice balance to the dial. There's really nice use of colors. They have a nice case design with a stepped bezel. They just, kind of hit a lot of these notes that, vintage watch enthusiasts find appealing, and yet, they have their own design. So they very much feel like a watch, that could have come out in that era. And then, you have both a chronograph and a three-hand. So, you have a nice combination there, or, the classic combination, but they went with a mechanical chronograph using the Seagull ST19 movement. So it is both affordable, coming in, and this is not an exact pricing as of yet. The project will be launching on April 12th. This video will probably accompany that launch. But this will be around $600, while the three-hand will be around $400, less on Kickstarter. But, that's around where the final retail price will be. So very good price for mechanical chronograph, a little bit higher than other Seagull chronographs often are. But, I'll tell you that the quality of this case and actually how the movement has been dealt with really kind of speaks to that being a very, very fair price. So now let's just quickly look at it. The case on this is a really, really nice design. It actually would have been large for a watch from the 40s, but for today's standards, I think it's really a perfect design. So it's 38 millimeters in diameter, 47 millimeters lug to lug, 12 millimeters tall, and that includes this acrylic crystal here. The height in particular, I think, is really nice because that is definitely, I'd say along the lines of a height of a manual wound chronograph you would have found from, the early mid-20th century. And these days, when you see kind of any chronograph, they're usually really massive, they're very tall, especially if there's a rotor. And even when we've seen ST19 movements before on other watches, they still tend to be kind of oversized watches. People don't play to one of the real strengths of the movement, which is the fact that it's fairly thin. While we're just talking about it, just kind of get into what's cool about the ST19 movement, which is that, this Asian-made, Chinese-made movement by Seagull is, basically a replica, not in a bad way, like they were actually bought the rights to make this from an old Swiss brand called Venus, which kind of changed hands a few times, and then the Swiss sold off the design and patents. So this is this really, close representation to that movement. And much like, kind of like the 861 movement that's in the Omega Speedmaster, it really harkens back to this earlier design for a chronograph. So it's beautiful looking. It has a column wheel on it, and it has, it's just a very kind of complex movement, but it's manual wound. It's fairly small, so it fits into this 38 millimeter case really well. When we were talking to Etienne about it, one thing that we've kind of felt when I've seen ST19 movements before is, while they're very attractive, is that they don't necessarily have the nicest feel, but this watch has a really nice snap to it. And they said that they actually really had to engineer the case for the movement. They didn't just drop the movement into a design. They had to really work back and forth. They went through several iterations of the pushers, several iterations of, you're talking tolerance iterations, not like real design iterations. So just to get that feeling really nice. And what you have here is a watch, that feels like any kind of like high-end column wheel chronograph. Also on the winding, it has a nice stiff wind. So they really got around some of those issues. And they also triple check the movements, which, kind of leads me to feel like they've done their due diligence to make sure that, you're getting this really good chronograph experience with this, that it's not really about using an inexpensive movement. This really is the right movement choice for this watch. while also maintaining, a reasonable price point. Anything else that would have been similar to this movement, I honestly, a manual wound mechanical chronograph would have upped this to several $1,000s. So, at this price point, I think it's perfect, and they did a really good job with it. So yeah, I'm sorry, actually that was a bit of a diversion, but looking back at the case, you have this really nice step design that's very indicative of the 40s. It's very simple machining, which I think is what they tried to get across. There's nothing really fancy about it, but they have these little decorative elements that make it really nice. So you just have this step here, it's polished on the top surface, and then brushed on all the other surfaces, so you have a little bit of a play in light. Looking at the side again, you just see it's very thin profile, drilled lugs, which are really great, easy strap changing, nice size pushers. You can see that, the lip here again. A lot of the height comes from the acrylic crystal, but, once again, is the right choice for this kind of design. It's just it has this simplicity to it. One detail I really like actually is how the lug is kind of low in the mid case. So you have this nice line that goes around, which emphasizes this stepping design. It's just very attractive. Quickly looking now at the dial. So there's going to be 4 different dial colors. This is actually an extremely dark blue with kind of a gold tone print as well as gold hands. This one really kind of struck all of us in the office. It's just beautiful. Really has a high-end look to it. It's one of the nicest blues we've seen because it's a really, really dark blue. It's nearly black. It doesn't shout blue in any way. And just when you turn it a little bit, you get this cool glint off of it. It really is one of the most tasteful blue dials. It almost speaks to the faded blue, the blue color and the slightly antique gold color really speak to something that almost is a little bit aged feeling, but not in a very forced way. This doesn't feel like they tried to make it look like it had been sitting in the sun for 50 years. Rather, these are just, colors. Maybe black would change to that. Maybe a gilt would kind of fade to that. And it's just really beautiful. And then the balance on the dial is just really, it's well thought out. So you have a 12 numeral at top, 6 at the bottom, dots in between. The sub dials then sit and take up, 3 and 9. The proportions of everything really exact. The way the edge of the subdial here is just perfectly equally spaced from the outer indexes, and the same spacing as from those dots. So just the space between that index and the dot and the edge of that. That kind of stuff just really plays towards a very balanced dial. Not a lot of negative space, but at the same time there is enough to let things breathe. Just a really, really good eye here. The outer index then has these kind of the outer edge of the dial has these block indexes and a line, all in this kind of interesting ochre gold tone. That line gets a little bit distorted by the acrylic, but I think that looks nice and has a very authentic feel. Then you have leaf hands for the hour and minute, and a sticks to hand for the second. All the gold tone here really works perfect. It has a very just elegant feel to it. Now I'll take a quick look at the 3-hand. The 3-hand version is powered by a Miyota 821A movement, and this will come in less expensive, closer to $400. And the dial here, I think it very much stays true to the same aesthetic concept as the chronograph, but obviously just a simple time-only design. So instead of the sub-registers, you have it filled in with a 3 and 9, and then you have a little bit more of a contrast play here where there's an inner ring and then the outer index is then a contrast color. And this is just an example of one of the other colors, which is this kind of ivory here with black, a black chapter ring. The chronograph version of this actually had silver subdials. And then the other colors, other than the blue and the ivory, are black with white, and then kind of a gunmetal sun ray, all very attractive and kind of give kind of their own little unique twist on the aesthetic. One thing that I really like about this, the cream one in both the chronograph and the 3-hand, is that there's an automatic here that is written in red. So it's the only model with a little red text on it and gives it kind of a certain kind of fun additional sportiness. On the wrist, the Baltic watches wear exceptionally well. I have obviously self-confessed preference for smaller watches, so a 38 millimeter chronograph with 47 millimeter lug to lug I think is really kind of an ideal fit for my wrist size. Yes, this would have been large for an actual watch from the 40s, but I think the upsizing actually works really well here because of the proportions are so kind of spot on. Had they come in a little bit more, the balance from the edge of the crystal to the edge of the case to the edge of the subdial would have been a little bit different. And there's just such a harmonious, balance here that I really wouldn't change that. And I think, this isn't meant to be like a costume 1940s watch. It's just really, closely inspired by those watches and stays true in a lot of elements, a lot of ways. And like we've always seen, whenever a brand takes those things and then blows it up to a 42 millimeter case, something really does get often lost in translation. Or lost in translation. So this is really nice to see. The height of the watch is also quite nice. The 12 millimeters. It reads very thin because a lot of that height is from the domed acrylic. So this sits very low on the wrist, slips under your shirt sleeve very easily, and that's really nice to see on a chronograph because you really just don't get that very often. And that's one of the things I actually really love about a lot of my vintage chronographs, like my Seiko 613-9s, is that they ride very thin, and it's just something that unfortunately a lot of modern watches don't have. Looking at the strap now, they come on a vintage style strap here with a 20 millimeter lug, I believe. This style is kind of the obvious match for the watch. To wrap up, I think Baltic, kind of hit the nail on the head with their first line of watches. There's been obviously a trend towards making vintage-inspired timepieces in the last few years. Some have been really excellent. Some have kind of missed the mark. I definitely put these on the side of excellent, and not just the styling of it, but all the little decisions that they've made. And I think that really does include using the Seagull ST19 movement, which I know is a little contentious. I know some people are going to balk at it, but I think you really have to try it out to judge it. And putting it in an affordable package, even if it's a tiny bit more than other ST19 movement watches cost, I think makes a lot of sense because, like I said, it's really all about the feel. And here they got the watch tuned so that the pushers feel great, the winding feels great. It does not have the feeling of being an inexpensive chronograph movement whatsoever. And then you get the classic Bicompax layout with seconds at 9 and minutes at 3, which I'd say like a lot of people have turned towards using the Seiko Mecha Quartz movements, which are great. Instead of these, but they have a 24-hour hand instead of one of those other hands. So there's always compromises to be made, and I think that they just made the right choice here. And then the use of the colors, the really subtle colors, the dark blue with the ochre. I mean, there's just a level of taste here that I really think you don't see very often, and getting it at this really nice price is fantastic. I mean, these watches definitely, you see it, you would not think $600 watch, you'd absolutely think a several $1,000 watch. 3-hand model, also really cool, and makes a really nice kind of pairing to the other watch. You could definitely see actually owning both if you really kind of like the size and the style, and getting them in 2 different colors, so you just have actually 2 fairly different experiences, but in this watch that maybe fits you really well. So yeah, I mean, be sure to check them out on Kickstarter, and when the Kickstarter project is over, should be listening to this much later, be sure to take a look at their website, and please read the article on wornandwound.com. Thank you for listening, and please also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.